Okay, well, we were just giving you guys a few moments for us to collect ourselves and get everything else ready. And hopefully several of you guys on the line were able to run out and take a quick bio break and generally address whatever you might have had in email. I've also been trying to respond to people's emails related to the session, and we have had a number of people in this session overall, and a lot of people excited about the content. Again, thank you very much for all your questions. We'll do as much as we can to answer those in the chat session, in the Q&A panel as we can. But now it's time for Dan and Pete to crank it up and get talking about EE6. So at this point, we'll let you guys take it away.
Thank you very much, Bert. So in this segment of the presentation, Dan and I are going to show you a little bit of the Java EE6 programming model, which is the primary programming model for writing applications for JAX-RS. The format's going to be, Dan is going to introduce you to some of the background to Java EE6, some of the innovations that have happened, some of the new technologies. And then I'm going to take over. I'm going to run through a set of demos. We'll see how far we get with them. There's quite a lot of content to cover there. The good news with the demos is that they are all based around the Getting Started Developing Applications guide for JAX-RS. So you can get the demos from the JAX-RS download page. You can get the documentation, the guide that accompanies the demos from the JAX-RS documentation. So anything you want to explore in more detail, anything we don't manage to cover in this session, it's right there for you to have a look at. We'll give you the links to that at the end of the session. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Dan. He's going to give you about 15 minutes of background to Java EE6. So Dan, take it away.
Thank you, Pete. So I want to talk to you today about, in this first part, about why we believe that EE6 programming can give you immediate productivity, and then Pete's going to show you hands-on. So in the first slide, we're going to start with breaking this down into some questions. We're going to just say, what is Java EE? Let's just remind ourselves, we know why we're here, what benefits is it offering us, and what improvements have been made. If you've used Java EE in the past, you may be looking to see maybe a new story, and we can give you that. What makes it extensible, and then turning it over to Pete, is it really that easy? Let's see it in practice. So next slide, looking at what is Java EE. So we create applications that connect people to computers, computers to other computers, and people to each other and each other's data. And we call all that enterprise application development. And next slide, at the same time, we also want to be able to scale these things. You know, we want to be able to take our application to massive heights. That might be millions of records, might be millions of users, millions of classes. You know, however you scale, the sky is really our limit. We don't want to be hitting limits, and so we need to look for a platform that's going to give us that. So next slide. So as you can imagine, those are complex requirements. But on top of all that, you still have to worry about your own business logic, which, frankly, that's what takes care of, you know, most of your day's work. So what if that were the only part you had to worry about? And that's where Java EE comes in. You take your functionality that you get as your business requirements, we call it your business logic, whatever, and you model it as components. And those components go into a standard platform, and they get the benefit of these services that the platform provides. And all that together, we call that a programming model. And it's really the ticket to accomplishing our goals and being effective developers. So next slide. Here are the benefits if you encapsulate that business logic inside of a standard Java EE component model. And we emphasize standard for reasons I'll mention in a second. So first, it's about less boilerplate code. You know, you don't want to be doing JDBC connection stuff and transactions and real detailed security and spaghetti code, because then it's very, very complex. And next slide, you really lose what I call the high signal-to-noise ratio. You want to look at your code. You want to see the code that was written by fellow developers, written that match the requirements. You don't want to have to swim through and try to find that in the spaghetti mess of all of the infrastructure plumbing. So next slide, one of the things that enables you to do that is you get all these powerful mechanisms for free. Some of those mechanisms are database connection pooling and transactions and security and declarative security and things like that. So you want to get all that in a way that doesn't really intrude your code. And so the next slide, the most important, I think, is at the end of the day, by moving to this model, you get portable applications and knowledge. That means you can move your application from one compliant container to another, and you can move from one job to another and talk about a common language, Java EE. So next slide. So, you know, you've been sold this before. I mean, that could be one of the things that's on your mind, right? You've been fed this line before, and it made your application look really fat. And, you know, the answer here is message received, and Java EE really needed to get on a weight loss program, and it got one. You know, all the spec leads and the stakeholders in Java EE, you know, they got together. They said, what do we really need? What don't we need? Let's throw out the junk. So that diet consists of a couple of things that I'll highlight here today. Of course, there's probably more, but what it comes down to is POJO components. So basic Java class, that's a component. No special interfaces, no special requirements or deployment descriptors or any of that. Just a class, and you can start writing your business logic. Then, if you want to enhance that class in some ways, you get annotations instead of having to go down and work in XML where you lose the single source of truth. You know, you have to toggle two files instead of being able to look at the one. We get automatic framework configuration so that you don't have to copy and paste your way to greatness. You don't have to copy and paste from one project to another to get one framework working, right? It'll work out of the box. EJB, which is maybe becoming a four-letter word in some people's mind, is gotten much, much lighter. And so we can get those benefits, but we don't have to, for instance, go to the advanced packaging like EARS. We can still use WAR files. And then profiles is another key to this. Is actually Jason was mentioning, you really have the ability to tune your application server, one in a standard way, and then you could even go further and in a non-standard way create an optimal profile for yourself. Servers have gotten much, much faster. As you heard Jason saying, I mean, we're talking blazing speeds. And this is going to really change the game, change the perspective of how people look at this programming model. How does 3-second startup sound to you? I mean, for me, that's incredible. And we're talking 3 seconds on a machine that's got Eclipse running, that's got web browser and all this stuff running. It doesn't matter what else you have running. You're not going to then start to lose performance. This is really good progress. Okay, well, you may think, but I already have 3-second startup or 2-second startup. I have a servlet container. Well, okay, true. Servlet containers, they can start very fast. In fact, the servlet container you likely use is one part of AS7. But the thing is that the servlet container, you're getting that speed by cheating. You're taking away the things that you need. And so then what you have to do is come in with a Swiss Army knife of extras, and you have to plug it all in there into your application. You get a 40, 50 megabyte deployment file, and then all of a sudden you're assuming responsibility of the application server on your own. What we want is a tight-knit group of functionality that's clean, and it's just as fast. And we can do that with Java EE. A lot of that came down to this idea of the web profile. The web profile is what I like to describe as pretty much everything you need to deploy a pretty standard web-based enterprise application. It's got the core components, right? It's got the presentation layer, it's got the business layer, and it has the data layer. And all across the way, you can do validation. And CDI is providing you all these services that you would need to kind of link everything together. The best part is that this whole thing, this whole package, fits inside of a WAR file. So you don't have to, if you want to use, for instance, EJB 3.1, you don't have to say, well, that requires a change in my packaging because I want more features. No, you should get those features, and you should still be able to use the packaging of your choice. At the heart of all this is context and dependency injection for the Java EE platform, which was labeled as CDI. Now, CDI is very interesting because it does bring together it glues together the platform in ways that it's really never been done before. And it provides really two main things, although it has really quite a number of extra features. It manages the components in scopes which would be relevant in a web application or other scopes such as a business application. And it offers dependency injection. And really the dependency injection part was the biggest missing piece in Java EE. So now we have the ability to wire components together, and we can do it in a way that provides loose coupling, but still strong typing. Now, why does that matter? Well, like many of the Java EE6 technologies, CDI is adhering to this goal of providing type safety. And the benefit of doing that is that you stay away from XML descriptors to try to supplement your application. And again, it's a single source of truth. If you look at your class file, you can see that it is taking a component. You can see a specific type of component that it's taking, or even a qualified component. So you can read the application the way it's wired together. Going to this next abstract slide of a tag cloud, this is really what your world kind of looks like. In addition to classes, you have these annotations. So is this annotation hell, or is this a good thing? Well, it turns out that this is a good thing, because the annotations are not configuration that's been moved into your class from an XML file. What it is that it describes what you want to have happen, and you don't have to worry about how it happens. So they should read in a semantic way. So let's just look at some examples. Injection 101. So you have a status updater, which perhaps is updating tweets on an application. So you want to shorten the URLs. You just say inject URL shortener. The way it determines which bean it's going to inject, it looks at the type. There must be one URL shortener in our application. Next class, let's look at a JPA entity with JAX-B capabilities for our JAX-RS service. Oh, and also it has bean validation constraints. Very, very tight and consolidated code. We get all of those features. So we can persist this as a database. We can return it via web service. We can make sure that the constraints from the web form are going to be enforced. So we get a lot of features right there. Let's move to a stateful named bean. Notice in EJB, no interface. We can use CDI. In an EJB, we can inject, for instance, the current speaker that we're editing. We can inject a JPA managed persistence context, and look at how concise and clean that add method is. Now, of course, that's maybe oversimplified, but at the same time, you get the idea that you can focus exactly what you want to do. Return speakers means go to the speakers.xhtml file in JSF. So we see integration there with the EJB if you want it. And the fact that it's a model annotation on there means that it's request scoped. So let's look at a JAX-RS resource. Let's say we want to return to a client who's not necessarily a web browser, but it's a client that's going to be like an Android application or something. Again, we can do an EJB. We can make it a JAX-RS resource. We can inject the persistence context. That's JPA. We can directly query from the database using the JPQL. This responds to the GET request. A lot of features packed right into one space. Let's move on to the next one. Okay, maybe that string was making you a little nauseous. Or maybe this makes you nauseous. You take your pick. You can use the criteria builder from JPA2 to remove all of the string potential mess-ups here, and we get all type-safe building of a query. All right, maybe you're thinking, I don't know about this is collapsing too many layers for me. So we go to one more slide. All right, let's put it all off. Let's put all that JPA logic into a speaker repository. We'll inject it into our EJB JAX-RS resource, and we'll just call the methods. What are we getting here when we're EJB? Notice we're not worrying about any transactions. That's just happening for us automatically. Moving on, the other thing, so this is really nice. These are great features, very consolidated code. They fit in slides. It's functional. But, what if we want more? Well, the good news is you can have more, too. CDI has this idea of portable extensions. Now, portable extensions I call an SPI for hacking Java EE. Never before have we seen Java EE really be able to extend its programming model before. So what this allows you to do, you can register beans, you can satisfy injection points your way, you can introduce custom scopes such as a business logic scope, business process scope, etc. You can augment or override bean metadata. Maybe you want to provide some data via XML or a database that configures your beans. Have at it. This enables you to build your own programming model or enhance the one that's there. So what this enables you to do is you get to have the beans, they're given to you, and you get to decide what you want to do with them at deployment time. You can move them around, shift them around, veto them, place them, whatever. So you don't have to go off and find another framework just to get a couple of enhancements. You can go ahead and build them yourself or download some already built enhancements like in the Scene 3 project. So in summary, what we're getting here is we have a portable, flexible, and extensible programming model. And I like to say that Java EE is your oyster. It's the way that you want to make it. And I think that we're going to see a lot of pearls being generated from this programming model. Now, all of this sounds good, but we have a major problem. Reality, right? We have one of these managers who says, look, I need one of those cloud buzz thingamajiggies, doesn't know what he's talking about, and he needs to demo it to the customer in 10 minutes. You know, maybe we don't have a manager that's this extreme, or maybe we all have a manager like Dilbert. So how can we possibly have time to use a platform like this? Yes, maybe if we had, you know, weeks and weeks, but we don't. So apart from sacrificing our health, is there something else that we can do? Well, I'm going to turn over to Pete to get started, and he's going to show you, look, this is a productive environment. This isn't just a powerful environment. So let's fire up the demo.
Thanks a lot, Dan. So I'm going to switch over to application, sharing my desktop even. Everything will work for everyone. Okay, close down the slides. So what I've got here is a copy of Eclipse Indigo installed with JBoss Tools 3.3 M2, which I'm very pleased to say has just been released. So this is available for you to try out when we finish the webinar. I've also downloaded JBoss AS Application Server 7, Release Candidate 1. And I'm going to start by adding the server in Eclipse. So I need to locate it. Pull it up. So I have it already loaded up in Eclipse. I can just hit Finish. And this creates me a server within Eclipse. I can obviously start the server, and we can see that, you know, we get it started up. I've got some applications already deployed to it. We're going to want to be able to also deploy applications from Eclipse, of course. And I'm going to want to show you some code. So I'm going to import these demo projects into Eclipse. They are all Maven projects, and we can import them using M2 Eclipse very easily. So I've used M2 Eclipse here. I've got that installed alongside JBoss Tools in Indigo, and I can just import them all. And Eclipse will just take a couple of moments to import them. JBoss Tools will very nicely enable all of the CDI features that we have for the project, all the CDI tooling that we need for the project. This gets enabled automatically when we import a CDI project using Maven. So Jason showed you deploying an application using the command line and using the command line tools, using the file system, using the web console. It's also possible to deploy applications using Eclipse. Now, I happen to have actually deployed some applications to the app server before starting this up. I have, in fact, most of the applications I'm going to show you today fired up. So what I'm going to do is very quickly stop those applications using, or undeploy those applications using the command line application. So just give me a moment. Connect. And again, you know, Jason showed you all of this, but it just shows you how easy this is all to use. I can very easily undeploy any application from here. So I can use tab completion, etc., etc. We've got a couple more to undeploy. That should be it, I believe. We've got one more to undeploy. So they're all undeployed now. If we switch back to Eclipse, on the console line, we can see that they all got undeployed. So this is all working very well together. So let's take a look at the first application that I'm going to show you, which is a really, really simple application. Pretty much it's your, it's your test application. Have I got JBoss AS installed properly? Have I got Eclipse set up properly, etc. It's this Hello World application. All it does is use a servlet to write some text to the output stream, and it uses a little CDI service to generate that string for you. So let's have a look at it running. So I can go to the server view here in Eclipse. I can drag and drop the project into the server. We can switch to the console, see it was deployed. We can, of course, switch to a web browser, a new window in the web browser, and we can see that it's all started up okay. Let's see. So as I said, really exciting application. It says hello world to us. So what does this look like? How does this application actually work? What I'm going to do is take you through a few of the class files, a few of the source files, and a few of the deployment descriptors that we use. So the first thing I want to point out is the deployment descriptors. As with any Maven project, these are located in source main web app. And of course, your deployment descriptors for a war normally go in WebInf. You can see I've only got one deployment descriptor in this file, in this war, which is beans.xml. Before we talk about what beans.xml does, I want to really highlight the fact that we don't even have to put a web XML into our war application in Java EE6. This is really, as Dan said, with Java EE6, we've really tried to listen to the complaints of people and really try and make this a zero configuration platform, a platform where you can do convention-over configuration. The app server will actually detect what you're trying to do and enable things for you. Of course, if you want to find a control, you can still use all the deployment descriptors you're used to. So, like I say, no web XML. As a side note, this actually confuses quite a lot of tools like Maven and in places even Eclipse, because they think that web XML must be present. They're so used to it having to be present that they actually insist it's there. So we have to do some little hacks inside our tool files to actually allow it to deploy without the web XML. I think that shows quite how quickly Java EE is moving, that that we're actually moving at a faster rate now than many tools vendors can keep up. So as I said, I promised to explain what beans.xml does. This is another relatively modern approach that Java EE has taken. And rather than forcing you to configure in some central file like web.xml or application XML what services you want enabled for your deployment, we instead use marker files. And these marker files simply indicate to the app server that it should start the service. In this case, it's CDI. So if we look inside the CDI file, look at the source of the XML, there's nothing in this file. It's simply an empty beans XML file there to mark that we should start CDI. In this quick start, what we've done is actually put all the schema information in there for you, so that if you wanted to take the quick start and have a play with it to change some things around, you would be able to start using the autocomplete of the XML. We also have an HTML file. This is very simple. All it does is use a meta refresh to redirect us into the actual servlet, which is located at Hello World. So let's open up the actual servlet. This is in source main Java, and it's called Hello World Servlet, pretty obviously. So I've got a few things I wanted to point out here. The first of which is that, as I said, we're not using web XML. So you might be wondering how we register the servlet and how we determine what context path it appears at. What we're using is something from Servlet 3. We're using the web service annotation to indicate that this is a servlet and to give it the context path for it to be loaded by. This is much better than using web XML, because suddenly when we refactor this servlet, we don't have to remember to update our web XML. The annotation gets dragged along with the servlet. And as Dan said as well, this is a single source of truth for our servlet. All the information we need about the servlet is encoded here. The other thing that's pretty interesting here, if you're new to the Java EE6 programming model, is the injection of a hello service. This is a service provided by CDI. Hello service is a CDI bean. And we can inject it using the app inject annotation into the service. So here we can see, as Dan said, that all of our services in Java EE are able to use all the other services. In other words, this is truly a platform. It's not just a collection of things, tied together with pieces of string. So what I wanted to do now is delve very slightly into how CDI works. CDI is really one of the key things when you're programming in Java EE to understand. It's also one of the new things, which is why I wanted to highlight this. As Dan said, CDI is type-safe. But what does this actually mean? What does this mean in practice? And really, when we consider this, this allows us to answer the question, when CDI, or when Java EE hits the app inject hello service line, how does it know what to inject into that field? What the type safety means, what it provides, is the ability for Java EE, for CDI, to look at that field and say, well, the type of the field is hello service. So therefore, what I'm going to look for is a bean that has type hello service. The type of the bean, the class of the bean is hello service. This is different to a lot of somewhat older dependency injection frameworks, such as Seam2, such as Spring, which use a variable name, such as, in this case, it will be the field name hello service, and a string-based. By having it type-safe, it gives us a lot of benefits. It means that we work with the compiler and with our tools, so that any refactoring we do is automatically propagated through the application without the need for special tooling. It also means, of course, that we can do things like click on the hello service and get taken immediately to the service implementation. What we've got here is a pretty trivial CDI bean. I wanted to highlight that there are no annotations placed on bean in the default case. So we're not forcing you to add annotations to your service that you don't need. This is, you know, it's very much convention over configuration. If you want the defaults, the sensible defaults that CDI gives you, no annotations needed. And then, as we saw, when the service is injected and called, we use this, and down here in the writer we call the create hello world, the create hello message, and write it out to the client. So it's pretty trivial example, but it gets us started on how CDI works. For our next example, we have some. For the next example we're going to look at the number get example. The number get example adds in a view layer, in this case JSF, the view layer that's provided with Java EE. And it provides slightly more functionality than the Hello World example does. So again, we can deploy it by dragging and dropping it to the server in Eclipse. Oh, I can use the mouse, and you can see it gets deployed. And of course, we can easily bring it up in our web browser. I'll just show you very quickly what it does. Jason promised I would show you some real-world apps. I'm afraid that a lot of the apps I have are also fairly toy apps, but for an introduction like this, it's pretty much perfect. So we can use this number guess example to guess at some numbers, and we can reset the guess, and we can play again. And it, you know, not very exciting. I don't think it's going to keep you entertained for very long, but it allows us to illustrate a few more principles of CDI and the Java EE programming model. So again, let's have a look at the deployment descriptors to start with. Again, located in the source main web app. We can see that, again, we don't have a web XML. We've got our beans XML from before, and this time we've got faces config XML. And just like beans XML is there to activate CDI, faces config XML is there to indicate that JSF should be used in this deployment. Again, it's an empty file. We've put the schemas in so that we can easily use it if we need to. We've got our index.html file. Again, it's a meta refresh kicking us into the application. In this case, loading up home.jsf. So let's have a look at our view. What do I want to highlight here? What I want to highlight for you here is a few little things. So, those of you who haven't used JSF before, JSF is a component-oriented server-side rendering framework. It uses an HTML style, an HTML-esque markup language in which you write your components and you bind your components to your backend beans using the expression language or EL. You can see a number of examples of the expression language on this page. We normally would specify the bean name, followed by a property. In this case, get or set number would be the property. So here, for example, what we're doing is outputting the messages we saw in the application. For example, we say that the guess must be higher or lower than the current guess number based upon some conditions. In this case, what this would mean is that we would call the gain bean and call the get number on it and check whether it's less than the current guess. And the guess is not equal to 0. That's a start condition. We then, of course, want to output some instructions for the user, again using properties, guesses, and setters. And we have an input field. Again, this binds back onto the bean. And this time, it's not just getting some value from the bean; it's also able to set a value on the bean. We also bind a validator, a validation method to the bean. We saw this when, for example, in my application, it said I was doing an invalid guess because I'd already guessed that it should be between 51 and 100. That was already something that told me. So it tells me, no, you shouldn't guess less than 50. That's the result of this validator method. The final thing we have on this page is a command button. The command button is there to trigger the application to call a method on the application. Command buttons don't deal with properties, with Java Bean style properties. They deal with simple methods, so this would then call the check method on the gain bean. So I've talked a little bit about the gain bean. Let's go and have a look at how it's wired up. So in source main Java, we have, in this case, 4 classes. The main one, the one that we really care about, is the one that has most of the logic in, is the gain class. So in the gain class, we have a number of things that we should highlight. The first of which is the named annotation, which is placed at the class level. Now, as we said, CDI is a type-safe dependency injection system. It always uses the type of an injection point and the type of a bean to wire together your application to resolve dependencies. However, sometimes, of course, in the example we just looked at, when you're using JSF and the expression language, you need to be able to access your bean in a non-type-safe environment. And in this case, you need to annotate your bean with the named annotation. The named annotation will automatically work out a default name for the bean. That's the same name you always give your fields and your variables in Java. It's the convention of dropping the case of the first word of the class name. Okay, so that's how we expose it to EL. We've then got this session scope annotation. This again comes from CDI. And what this says to CDI is store this bean in the session. The first time this bean is accessed, it will be created, and it will be stored in the session. And every other time that you access this bean from the client, using expression language or injection, you will get the same instance back from the session. This is an example of where a business decision or a use case feeds into your application design. In this case, we said we want the same number get application instance to be presented to you, regardless of which browser tab you use, regardless of which browser window you use. It's the same for your session. Of course, if we were designing a more complicated and more complete application, we could decide to isolate browser tabs and use, for example, CDI's conversation support to do that. What comes next? We've got a number of fields, and then we've got an injection. And this injection, in fact, we've got a couple of injections. We've got one of the maximum number that should be guessed, and one of the random number that needs to be guessed. So there's a number of things I want to say here. The first of them is that when we think about the type-safe dependency injection that we discussed, the sharp-eyed among you will have noticed that we're injecting 2 integers here. And I should point out that CDI automatically boxes types. So an int, a primitive int, is considered identical to the integer object when CDI is looking at the type to inject. And this is a good example of a case where we need to disambiguate between 2 different integers. It's of course perfectly valid to have 2 different types of the same class available for injection in your application. And so if we know when we're developing our application which instance of a bean we want to inject, we can use something that CDI calls a qualifier to do this. And the qualifiers we have here are max number and random, the 2 annotations we have here. So before we go on, let's take a look at the max number qualifier and see what it looks like. So max number is an annotation that I've written for this application. I've added this boilerplate Java stuff to it, these annotations here. The target annotation restricts the places I can apply this annotation in my code, and the retention is something you must put in. Java by default may or may not hold an annotation round for runtime. Of course, CDI is a runtime library. It needs to be able to respect the annotation at runtime in order to determine what to do. So we need to make sure that the annotation is always kept around at runtime. We then have the annotation at qualifier. This annotation is provided by CDI, and it indicates to CDI that this is a qualifier annotation. So that's what a qualifier looks like. It's nothing too complicated, and when you use CDI, you'll find you'll start writing quite a lot of these. So what does this mean? Well, it simply means that when CDI comes to work out what to inject, the first thing it will do is say, right, okay, I've got an integer type here to inject into. What are all the integer types available for injection within the system? What are all the integer beans? Well, it gets two back. It gets the max number and the random number. So it now needs to disambiguate between these two. So it looks at any qualifiers that are on the injection point. This is our max number. It tries to match those that are on the bean. And in this case, there'll be a bean with the max number qualifier, and so it will inject that qualifier. So that's how we can extend the type-safe injection system and disambiguate between different beans at development time. We can decide what to inject at development time. The other thing I wanted to point out here is we're using this instance interface. Now, instance is a way of saying, rather than inject the result of the random number, being the actual integer, it's saying inject a handler, a reference to that, which then allows us to do things like call get on the random number, and this allows us to get multiple random numbers. This is simply a way of saying, of allowing us to reset the game and get multiple random numbers in the course of a session. Remember, we made this being session scoped, but we want to be able to allow people to reset the game and play again. So we're going to need to get more than one random number injected. Anything else on this beam that's interesting? We've got a number of getters and setters. We've got the check method. This does the business logic for checking whether our guesses are correct or not. We've got the reset method. This is a method that's called when the reset button is clicked. What we've done here as well is a little bit interesting. We've said, well, actually, of course, we need to kind of reset this beam when we first create it. In other words, we need to set it to its default state for playing the game. So obviously when someone clicks the button, that happens. But we also need to really call this when the bean is first instantiated. This allows us to follow the DRY principle and not repeat ourselves by putting this logic in twice. So we make the method, the reset method, also post-construct. In other words, we tell the container to call this when the bean is instantiated. And finally, of course, we've got this validate method. This is a JSF-specific signature that allows JSF to call this method to validate a value. And you can see we do things like check it, and we output some messages to the UI layer if the guess is invalid in some way. So I've shown you the max number and the random number. I'll just briefly talk about how these numbers are created. How do we expose these numbers as beans? I have this generator class. This is application scoped. Now, the reason we need to make this application scoped is to do with how random numbers are generated. Of course, we don't want to restart the random number generator within the application. We want to give a truly random number each time we play the game. So we make the random number generator that Java provides application scopes, so we're only using the same one each time. So how do we use this? What we do is we have a method that's here called next, and this method is responsible for calling next in on the random number generator of Java. It's also responsible for applying our range of between 0 and max number and exposing it. We also have a method called getMaxNumber that simply returns the maximum number. Again, this is used in our view layer to display various things. Now, of course, I could have done this by injecting the generator into the game class. And in that case, you would have seen something in the game class when I needed to get the next random number in the reset method. I've called generator.next. When I needed to get the maximum number, I would have called generator.getMaxNumber. But that introduces coupling between the generator, which in this case is the component providing a service, and game, which in this case is a component acting as a client of the service. And as Dan said, one of the goals of CDI is to remove coupling between your services and promote loose coupling. And this allows us to, and one way we can do this is using producer methods. Producer methods have two purposes. The first purpose of a producer method is to allow us to introduce looser coupling between a client and a server. And in this case, what it allows us to do is say, rather than depending on the generator in our client, we depend on just an integer with a particular qualifier. And this will be perfectly exemplified by getMaxNumber. The second point about producer is, you'll remember that I said with a qualifier, it allows us to select between bean implementations. It allows us to disambiguate our bean implementations if we know which bean we want to inject when we're developing the application. Now, sometimes it's useful to be able to decide which bean to inject when you're running the application at runtime. So you want to be able to select between implementations, instances at runtime. And as you can see, a producer method is perfect for doing this, because CDI will always call the method, and then you can decide what to return from the method at runtime. Next up, I want to very quickly take you through. I'm going to skip, as I said, this is all based on our Getting Started Developing Applications guide. The next step in the Getting Started Applications guide is the login example, which you can see here. The login example adds JPA, so persistence, JTA, in other words, transactions, and EJB for controlling those transactions. I'm going to skip that. I'm going to move on to the kitchen sink example, because I want to show you a couple of the cool features we have, which are new in JBoss AS7 and are more JBoss AS7 specific than the Java EE programming model we've looked at so far. So the first thing I want to show you is running tests. And to do this, we use the Arquillian framework. You can find a lot of resources about Arquillian on the internet. You can also find how to configure this example application and how this example application is configured using Arquillian in the guide. So what we're going to do is run the tests that we have inside the application server. To do this, I'm enabling a Maven profile. This simply adjusts the dependency set I have on my class path in Eclipse. This is something that's just set up in the POM for the example. And in here what I've done is I've said, use the remote profile, the JBoss AS remote profile. And what this profile tells Arquillian to do is connect to an already running JBoss AS instance. You'll see that this changed the class path slightly. We've now got a number of JBoss AS specific artifacts on the class path. This is what allows Arquillian to connect to JBoss AS for you. So let's have a look at the test. We're not going to worry about what the test does. What we're going to do is look at how the test works. So this is a standard JUnit test. It's a standard JUnit test, and we can see we've got what we would expect, which is a test method down the bottom. I'll come back to this class in just a moment. What I want to do is show you the test running in JBoss Application Server. So as you'd expect, I can right-click, I can run as, I can choose JUnit test. We can see that the test gets deployed to the application server. We can see this test wall getting deployed here. We can also see that the test passed just fine in the JUnit runner. I can also run this test from the command line. This is an amazing project. I could easily run this test from the command line. We also have a profile set up so that Arquillian will automatically start JBoss AX for you, which is great for running continuous integration. The remote profile is better for running in Eclipse. It allows you to debug easily. So let me take you through this test quickly. And again, as I've been saying throughout, if you want more, check out the guide. It has a lot more detail on how this all works. We've got the running annotation. This is a JUnit annotation. It's what hooks Arquillian into the test. We have this deployment annotation. This tells Arquillian what artifacts, what classes, what resources you want to deploy to the application server. As we saw, this actually deploys a wall to the application server. This is not magically taking your class path and bundling it all together and shoving it over. You've got very precise control over what you send. We can do some pretty cool stuff in here. We can depend on other Maven artifacts to enable easy bundling of jars. We can adjust versions of dependencies, so you can really do some pretty tight control of your test case. Arquillian also allows us to inject in the normal CDI fashion into our test case. That's really powerful. We can then use these injected variables inside the test case, and away we go. Now, you know, there's lots to learn with Arquillian. There's lots to learn with shrink-wrap, which is what we use to package up the deployment. But at its base, it's very simple. It allows you to use your existing tools, because it runs with JUnit and TestNG. So all the tools that you're used to still work. It's simply really an add-on to that. It enables to run tests inside the application server. So with that, I'm going to flip back over to the slides. Before I do that, I want to emphasize that this example I have here also has things like JAX-RS and being validation in. It's got a whole range of sort of the new and exciting technologies from Java EE6 in it. So do check it out. It really does take you through Java EE6 pretty well. And the final thing to point out with this, before we go on, is that this example is actually generated from a Maven archetype, completely unmodified. So in the guide, we have instructions for how you can generate your own app. It comes with the sample test and the sample JAX-RS classes, sample beam validation, that are customized for your packages and your group IDs and all this kind of stuff. So again, do check that out. You know, you can use that from Eclipse, you can use it from the command line. So going back to the slide deck, we're going to move on, and I'm going to hand back over to Dan to finish off the last few slides.
All right, thanks, Pete. Man, that was exciting, wasn't it? All right, so what we want to do is we want to wrap up by seeing if we answered the original questions that we brought forth today to see whether we get immediate productivity. So first of all, what is Java EE? Well, as you've seen, it's a very powerful and type-safe programming model. What benefits is it offering us? We're getting a lot less code that we have to write, and we get portability. And I'll mention that one of the things that can really help you test your portability is if you write Arquillian tests, you can actually run them against different servers. So along the development process, you can make sure that you're staying on the track, if that's a concern to you. Is it extensible? Absolutely. What improvements have been made? Right. It's optimized for productivity and automation. So basically, it's lost a lot of weight, and that's both in the specifications and in the implementations. So we're seeing that it's very optimized for you to get your work done quickly. Is it extensible? Yes, via CDI extensions, which we really didn't go into today, but you can see plenty of other presentations we've given on the topic. And then, is it really easy? Well, yeah, absolutely. You saw that firsthand in Pete's examples. So basically, the immediate productivity formula is Java EE6 plus AS7. And if you grab that, grab the tutorials, which we'll link to in a second, you can test out this theory. So the next steps for you, first download a Java EE6 container. Obviously, we recommend JBoss AS7, which you can get from jboss.org/AS7, or you can navigate from the jboss.org homepage. You can create a Java EE6 project. The best way that we recommend doing that is to follow the tutorial that Pete's written up. It's at the bit.ly link. You see AS7 tutorials. We highly recommend that you get some tools. JBoss Tools, as you saw Pete using, is an excellent way to be able to get even more productivity out of the development process. And we have an up-and-coming tool called SceneForge, which will allow you to do scripting and command line development. Watch for AS7 news. As we mentioned, the JBoss AS7 is the official hashtag. And what we want to hear from you is, what do you love about JBoss AS7? So give it a try. Give us your feedback. Say, oh, you got a start time that beats your buddy, or perhaps just something that you want to see improved. Let us know. We also encourage you to follow JBoss News on Twitter so you can keep up to date with the latest announcements. Specifically, if you're looking for the final release of AS7, keep a close eye on that hashtag. So that wraps up our talk. We'll take some Q&A at this point, live, either in the chat room and the webinar, or in Twitter if you want to catch us later.
Well, that's fantastic. And we've had a lot of questions that have come in. One thing I would like to point out quickly, it was noticed by one of the participants that the bit.ly link for AS7 tutorial is without the S at the end, without the plural. So, and I double-checked that as well. So just be aware of that one. We want to make sure people get access to those tutorials. So remove the S and you're good to go. AS7 tutorial. A couple key questions, though, that I'd like you guys to try to address, since we have Dan and Pete here on the phone. And by the way, Jason, thank you very much for pounding through a lot of the answers while the other guys were talking. Hopefully most of you guys got your questions answered there. And don't forget about the management sessions tomorrow where we'll drill down on some of those things. But a lot of questions related to how do I deal with my Scene 2 applications? You know, are they supported on AS7? How do I move Scene 2 applications to Scene 3 plus CDI and EE6? There are pieces that are missing. When can I expect a migration guide? What does that transition look like, etc.? Can you guys address that point?
Do you want me to take that?
Yeah, why don't you get started and Pete can jump in.
Sure. Right, so the question is, you know, obviously you guys have, a lot of you have apps you want to get migrated, perhaps to use your own framework that you're running on AS5 or EAP5 or something like that, or you're using Seam. You know, one of the things that we're going to be focusing on a lot in the coming months is migration guides of various sorts. I mean, obviously we want you to get migrated both for your productivity and because, you know, it'll make it easier for us to add features for you. So I think that what you're going to see is a lot of blog entries, a lot of documentation coming up on how to migrate. We're going to be looking at example applications we've written in the past, Scene 2 applications, example applications on AS6, migrating those and kind of telling the story of how to migrate them. And we'll also be collecting some information from the community about migration stories and seeing if we can, you know, capture those use cases and put some instructions together. So it's going to be definitely a community effort. Obviously, we can't paint the whole story because we don't necessarily know how you're thinking, so we want to work together on this. So, but it is a priority.
And a couple other questions. Or Pete, do you have any follow-on to that?
No, I think Dan hit that perfectly.
Okay, and one other question I'd like to point out, because it came up in Jason's session and it came up again, there seems to be some concern about exploded wars. So I noticed that, Dan, you did respond to that, and I think Jason did as well. Exploded wars are still supported on AS7. But do you guys have any additional insight or want to make another point on that topic?
You want to mention, Jason?
Do we still have Jason on the line?
Sorry, I was answering one of the questions. I missed the verbal question. Can you repeat it?
Yeah, if you don't mind, just kind of hit on the exploded wars topic again. I noticed it several times in the Q&A, so several people were asking about it. Specifically, you know, can I do it? Is it supported with AS7? Can I make updates to my applications, you know, on the fly with AS7 when it comes to an exploded war?
Yes. Okay. So if you run in standalone mode, you can use exploded deployments. In fact, I think the demos were using it at some point. If you're running in domain mode, since you are typically managing VMs that are on a different physical server, it doesn't make a lot of sense to have it in exploded mode, and there's issues with NFS and so on. So yes, in standalone mode, which is mode that a lot of people will probably use if they're doing local IDE-based development, you can do exploded development. You can change any form of static resource just fine, like HTML pages and so on. If you want dynamic JSP compilation, there's a setting, development mode, you can turn on, and that'll also add additional stack trace information. Although the reason why we have it, you may be wondering why do we have that off by default? The reason is that there's some specification rules that basically say that things that we do in development mode we're not supposed to do or not allowed to do, and we're supposed to ship by default with a spec compliant configuration. So that's the only reason why we have it off. But we feel most people use JSF or GWT or any other kind or modern web technologies versus JSP. So that's the one thing. And then obviously you can't copy class files over and have them take effect although you could theoretically put in new class files and they would load. So if you're looking for incremental hotcode replace, you know, you'd have to use a different project for that.
Okay, thank you very much for that. So how about a question for Pete? A question that I've seen in the Q&A panels basically asks, do scene conversations still exist in EE6?
Do scene conversations still exist was the question?
Yes, scene conversations. What do we...
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. CDI has conversations built into the core. They are, of course, somewhat different to the ones that were in Scene 2. Part of the point of standardizing something is to take the best of not only what we have done, but what other people have done. And so other people had other experiences around conversations that they, you know, that we felt actually, you know, on reflection, made a lot of sense. So the key differences are that in Scene 2, there was support for a concept called nested conversations. Nested conversations are a little tricky to get right, and there's certainly not consensus through the industry on how nested conversations should work. So that hasn't been incorporated into CDI. The other thing that happened in Scene 2, which didn't make it to CDI, was annotation-driven control of conversations. In CDI, conversations are controlled programmatically. In CDI 1.0, we have support for conversations in JSS. And in CDI 1.1, which we're developing now, and will be in Java EE7, looking to the future, we're going to extend the conversation support out to servlets and out to other you know, people who want to use conversations as well, even outside of the web tier.
And Pete, another question that you can address pretty quickly is, how does CDI relate to JUICE, which is also type-safe?
Absolutely. When I do a CDI presentation, one of the things I always say is that CDI, two biggest influences are probably Seam and JUICE. Seam contributes a lot of the ideas around Java EE integration with EJB, and a lot of contextual ideas. And pretty much, you know, a lot of the type-safe CDI options were drawn from JUICE. So JUICE is definitely a strong influencer of CDI. In terms of relation nowadays, there is a specification in Java called the AtomJAX specification. This is the basis for CDI. It provides a number of the annotations, essentially, that CDI uses, and CDI then gives those annotations some behavior. I believe that JUICE 3, which isn't currently available, as far as I'm aware, I haven't checked this very recently, but JUICE 3, which as far as I'm aware is still in development, is an implementation of the AtomJAX specification. So at that point, the annotations that we use in CDI and that JUICE uses in JUICE 3 will be aligned. These are the basic annotations like AtomJAX and Arquillian that we saw today.
And I think I'll toss a question over to Dan. And Dan, you've been also answering some questions here in the Q&A panel. But two questions came up related to books. You know, where's the Scene 3 book, and what is the best advanced book for CDI? And I know you're in the book game. What do you got for us there?
Sure. So we actually have a book that's in proposal. Likely it's not going to be, I'm going to hand off the writing of that book to one of our other core team members. And the reason is I'm doing entirely too much to be able to write a book right now. But that doesn't mean that, you know, we can't have someone that I think is even better to be able to write a book, another Manning author. So we certainly have been looking into that. I think to write a Scene 3 book, we have to write a CDI book because it would be way too much. I mean, the book would be like even longer than Scene in Action was, and we don't want to kill you with books. So what we want to do is break it up and have a CDI book, and then have an application development book for including the Scene 3 modules. You know, Scene 3 is we're still trying to get basically the documentation of the project out, and I think that's the focus that really matters the most. So I think in terms of reading about this stuff, I think the best place to read it is, you know, in the guides that we're putting together, some of which are already there. The Weld guide is very good for CDI. The AS7 guide will continue to mature, and then the Scene 3 guide will also cover key concepts of CDI. So I think really the smart thing for us to do to get you the information the fastest is to focus on the reference guides.
Okay. Well, we are actually at the top of the hour, and we've kept people here for 2 solid hours. Hundreds of you stayed on the line with us today.
Thank you all.
Thank you guys very much. Yes, absolutely. Jason, thank you very much for your time today. And
Thank
Pete,
you very much.
You as well. And you guys can keep answering questions in the Q&A panel for a little bit longer. I'll leave the session up, and John, our producer, hopefully you don't mind leaving it up. You can just pass the host role back to me. We'll take a few more questions that way. But at this point, we do need to bring it to a close from a presentation standpoint. Keep watching www.jboss.org/AS7. That'll be where different pieces of news come out related to new sessions, new webinars. If you're looking for the Getting Started guide, you saw the bit.ly link earlier. And then also follow us on Twitter, and don't forget to sign up for the JBoss Developer Newsletter. Another thing I'd like to point out is that we are CR1, just went out the door this morning. So Jason just announced that this morning, so keep in mind CR1 is now available for AS7. And there's also the domain management and clustering session on tomorrow, about 22 hours from now. All right, so please sign up for that one as well. All right, thank you guys very much.
Thank you.